Hey everyone, welcome back. I am excited today to bring you something a little bit different and adjacent from what we normally do. My guest today is Rachelle Bergstein. She is a lifestyle writer, best-selling author, and editor. She focuses on style, pop culture, and families. And she has written a book called The Genius of Judy and is out in paperback right now. It is about Judy Blume. And Rochelle wrote to me and said, I'd love to be on the show to talk about Judy Blume and her work on divorce and also how she influenced the feminist movement and also was influenced by it. I think there's a convergence there. And you know me, guys. I was like, Judy Blume and feminism, yes, please. Add in divorce, cool. So here we are. I'm so happy to have you here, Rochelle.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
So, okay, Judy Blume wrote a couple of books on divorce, but her very first book for children on divorce was written in 1972.
Yes. It is called It's Not the End of the World, which is such a great title for a book for children about divorce, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we have to kind of rewind and look back at the early 1970s and give Judy Blume credit for writing a book about divorce for children when no one was doing anything like that, right?
Yes.
So she was inspired not by, what felt like a commercial idea or an idea from her publisher. This came from her own lived experience, which was that she was seeing couples break up all around her in her town in suburban New Jersey, and it was impacting the children of those families and her own children who were elementary schoolers at that time were seeing this happen and saying, are you and daddy going to get divorced? What is divorce? We're scared this is going to happen to our family, which it eventually did. But in that moment, Judy just wanted to create a story to show children that if parents got divorced, it wasn't the end of the world. The family would
Mm-hmm.
go on.
Mm-hmm.
And, what a edge thing to do at that time to kind of normalize divorce for children who probably felt very alone in that experience when their parents were splitting up.
For some reason, my parents never got me that book. I mean, they split up in 1972. I don't know why that book was not given to me as a child. But
My
here we are.
parents didn't get me that book either. And it's funny because my parents split up in the mid 80s. And even though now when I look back at the stats, I'm like, divorce was so normal. Um, just in the area where I grew up, it wasn't. And families were actually quite traditional. So even still, 15 years after this book published, when my parents broke up, I still felt kind of isolated in the experience.
Sure, sure, absolutely. And of course, what's interesting is that I read all the other books, right? So I don't know. Maybe it wasn't as popular. It was certainly vilified, right? It was like uh, it was definitely well, not as much as say Forever, but
It is among her banned books. So it's not her most banned, like Forever, I think, is the most banned. Second only to Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret, right? But It's Not the End of the World has been banned. And I think part of it is that um it goes against the grain of the idea that all families have to have this very traditional structure. And it allows its main character, Karen, to really feel her feelings when it comes to the divorce of her parents. Like, even though it's probably the best thing for her parents, she is still really angry and hurt and upset and scared. And we watch her go through all of these feelings of grief through the course of the book, kind of like no holds barred. She's mean, she yells at her mother, she does all of these things that are totally normal for a child, but like weren't represented in a book up until that point.
yes, and I love that. I love that, right? Because what I think that's sort of a hallmark of Judy Blume is that she writes about kids in her children's books. She writes about kids actually behaving the way that children behave, not in some fantastical, and she was one of the first to do that, right? Um,
Yeah.
they were really raw and honest.
One of her major innovations, looking back at Judy Blume's whole body of work, is this idea that people aren't perfect. And it sounds so obvious, but there was kind of an unwritten rule in children's book publishing that all books that were, aimed towards kids had to have some kind of really clear-cut moral. And the
Hmm.
parents tended to be these paragons of virtue, and that they were great examples for their children. And that when the children messed up, they could look to their parents, and their parents would be there steady to guide them with the right advice. And that wasn't Judy Blume's experience of her parents. It's not many of our experiences of our parents. And so what she did was she just created situations in her books where, the kids often on the cusp of their teenage years, so like deep in their adolescence, are watching their parents and they're seeing things happen in their families and they're thinking to themselves, maybe that's not how I would do things in this situation. And when I'm an adult, I might do things differently. And that, of course, is such a huge part of growing up. But again, it was Judy who distilled it into narrative form and made it feel normal to all of these kids who were picking up her books.
Yeah, I so relate to that, right? And that's why we were, as a child of the 70s, right, reading it under the covers, like this sort of um almost desperate reading, like, oh my gosh, I am represented in this. These are the feelings that I've been having. This is the anger. This is the rage. This is the questioning. This is the desperation, right? That sort of like, quiet teen angst, right? Like there it is on the page, which we now have in this massive body of young adult fiction, which didn't exist at the time.
Exactly. So many writers now are writing these really brave, bold, honest stories for children. And a lot of them look back and say, Judy Blume is my inspiration. She was doing this type of thing first. And, it's a word that we use a lot now, but I don't think was used very much in the 70s and 80s, which is normalization. Judy
Right.
Blume, here she is. She's normalizing divorce. She's normalizing kids behaving badly. She's normalizing menstruation. She's normalizing losing your virginity. These are things that are not new. They weren't new then. They're not new now. But it was new to put them into quote unquote literature for children and to let kids feel themselves reflected in the pages of a story.
And I think the other thing that she normalized is um, exploring these topics that are so complex and difficult with a sort of an empowered, from a kind of an empowered stance, right? There's a curiosity that her characters have that often leads them into making choices, excuse me, um, that often leads them into feeling and being empowered. I mean, Forever, I think, is a prime example of that. And for anyone in my audience who does not know what Forever is about, can you break it down and the sort of, I think, feminist brilliance of it? Um,
Yeah, so Forever is a book that was published by Judy Blume in 1978. And this
that's
is the book that's
crazy.
probably, it's crazy. It's probably gotten her into the most trouble through the course of her career because it is about two high school aged kids. They're about to graduate, they're looking at colleges, and they fall in love and they decide to have sex. And it's that simple. They have this romance, and the protagonist is a girl. Her name is Catherine, and she waits until she's ready to lose her virginity, but then she does it responsibly. She does it, from an emotional standpoint, it's responsible because she's in love. From a physical standpoint, it's responsible because she goes and she gets herself birth control at Planned Parenthood, and she has sex with her boyfriend, Michael. They experiment, they try to make it more pleasurable, they enjoy it. And
They
then at the end of
focus
the
on her pleasure.
they focus on her pleasure, right? And she feels
Amazing.
empowered and unafraid to express her enjoyment of sex. And then this is, as if all of that is not like bold and cutting edge enough. At the end of the book, they break up. And this was such a huge departure from any other literature in which teenagers had sex, where usually it ended in disaster, right? Like someone was horribly punished. It was usually the girl. She ended up pregnant, abandoned, having a back alley abortion, missing her high school graduation, getting married too young, all these terrible things. And Judy Blume was like, that's not really how it goes in real life. People do have sex in high school and then they move on in a lot of cases. And that's what Catherine does. She falls out of love with Michael and nothing bad happens to her, except that she has to deal with the repercussions of having broken his heart, which again is a very normal experience. But she's not punished in some sort of like overarching, life-affecting way. And that
Hmm.
was huge for that book to show a young couple have sex and then nobody dies, nobody has their life ruined. It's just a
Yeah,
normal
it's not like a Romeo and
milestone.
yeah, it's not like a Romeo and Juliet thing. They're not like, torn from each other. It's not like a Wuthering Heights. Like it's literally just and it's so female driven, right? Like they want to have sex. She waits until she's ready. She makes the choice. She makes a very as you said, responsible choices. And then she decides she's not ready for this relationship to continue when she goes off to college and like moves on with her life. Again, making a very responsible choice. And oh my God, did the Christian right lose their minds?
Oh, people were so angry. I mean, and what's crazy is that, 50 years later, people are still angry about that book. And that book still gets removed from shelves and it still gets banned in places. And it is wild, you know, for the most part. And I know like there's so much, I'm opening up a can of worms to talk about book banning. There's
Oh
so
no,
much going on
let's.
with that. Yeah, there's so much going on with that right now. Um,
Mhm.
and for the most part, it's not particularly focused on sexuality or heterosexual sexuality. A lot of the books that are being banned now are about LGBTQ characters and um, people of color and Black lives. But, that book just really pisses people off. And I think a lot
Hmm.
of it is like the joy that these characters feel in their sexuality and the playfulness. And then again, the fact that nobody's life is ruined.
Hmm. Yeah, there is no morality lesson in it. I mean, there is actually, but certainly not one that the conservative movement wants girls to experience.
Agreed. I mean, I think there is a lot of kind of important morality in the book about, making sure, again, that you're emotionally and physically prepared if you're going to make this choice and that you're aware that, once you decide to have sex with your boyfriend or girlfriend, you're crossing a kind of threshold that you can't come back from.
Hmm.
Um, and all of that stuff is really baked into the book. But no, it's not an abstinence book. It's not a wait until marriage book.
No, and she goes to Planned Parenthood, which I
She
mean,
goes to Planned Parenthood, which we know.
yes,
Yes,
is right,
is a bit of an
exactly.
issue now. Yeah.
Exactly. It is a bit, yeah, a bit of an issue. So I want to go back to her divorce, Judy Blume and divorce and her books on divorce. Um, when she wrote, was she when she first started writing about divorce, was there like a new perspective, was besides like the idea that like, yeah, nobody dies and things are going to be okay. What other new perspectives did she bring? Certainly also from like how was she influenced by the feminist movement and that intertwining of those of I always feel like they were happening concurrently, right? She's being influenced by the feminist movement, then she's writing these books that are bestsellers, and then the feminist movement is also being influenced by her. There's like this sort of intertwining thing that's happening.
I couldn't agree more. And this was kind of the like eureka moment when I was writing this book, which was that I realized she was not only being influenced by the feminist movement in real time, but she was translating those messages for young readers kind of as soon as they were hitting popular culture. So Judy Blume is really clear, she wasn't out in the streets marching. She wasn't, not that this is a real thing that really happened, but she wasn't like burning her bras on the streets of Fifth Avenue. She was not an activist per se. She was a homemaker But she resonated so much with what she was hearing about the feminist movement, and she in turn put that into her books. And I'm sure as you did too, I read all of her books as a kid, but then when I revisited them as an adult for this project, it really became clear to me how much intention she had put into the mother characters in her books, and that the mother characters in a lot of cases are either like mouthpieces for the feminist movement, or they're kind of negative examples of what happens when a woman is not necessarily true to herself and her ideals, and she actually just follows the steps of her life as
Right.
it's been laid out for her by somebody else. So I think in order to really understand Judy Blume's perspective on divorce and the way that she wove it into her books, you have to understand that she was raised in a very traditional household, and that she felt she grew up with these very 1950s messages like, you can be anything you want to be, but really you should be a wife and a mother. Like,
Hmm.
yes, you can be smart, you can explore your creative side, you can go to college, but really you're going to be a failure if you're not a mom by 25. And she fulfilled that promise. She got married before she graduated from college. She was pregnant. She had babies by her early 20s. And when she started writing, it was very much because she felt really deeply unfulfilled in the choices that she had made. She loved her kids, but there was something wrong and she couldn't quite put her finger on it. So
Hmm.
she turned to this creative outlet in part just to kind of satisfy this hunger inside of herself that felt deeply unsatisfied. And so I hinted earlier, she did end up getting divorced.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of this stuff was kind of percolating as she's writing these books. Like I said, when she wrote It's Not the End of the World, she didn't explicitly intend to divorce her husband. The divorce wasn't in the works. But I think she was working a lot of this stuff out for herself, and it came out on the page.
Yeah, I get that sense when I read about it that she was it was definitely her marriage was in trouble when she was writing
Yes.
the book. And I assume she was writing what she wanted for her kids, and for herself, which was something that would not destroy everybody and she wouldn't be vilified for. How was she not out in the streets, all of that, but was she in connection, in conversation with the sort of feminist icons of the time, like Gloria Steinem? Like, was she at all connected with them? No, just,
She wasn't. She was
yeah,
just a fan.
yeah.
I think at that time, first of all, her husband was conservative. So, I found this great detail where um, she actually campaigned for Nixon because that's who her husband was voting for, but then she secretly voted for Kennedy. So,
Love it.
she was kind of like a secret Democrat from the start. But she was not, like I said, she was not an activist. The people in her community were not activist driven.
Hmm.
Um, she would complain that she would try to talk to the women in her community, the other mothers, about some of the issues that were on her mind, and she felt that they weren't particularly engaged on those things. So she wasn't finding her
Mm,
people. Um, but of course, all of this stuff was in the popular discourse. Like Kate Millett was on the cover of Time magazine. Um, The Feminine Mystique published in 1963. So she was very aware of the conversation around feminism, but no, she
right.
wasn't a big part of it. And I think part
Yeah.
of my motivation when I wrote this book was to say, we celebrate these figures like Gloria Steinem for their contributions to feminism. But to me, Judy Blume's contribution has as yet been a little bit below the radar. It's been a little bit unsung, and I would like to sing it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, like, why did you write this book? Like, why, after all this time, did you turn to Judy Blume and go, we need to unpack this and explore this?
Well, I started to notice, it came up as an idea to write about Judy Blume, and then I started to notice that every time I brought up Judy Blume, just around my peers, women in their 40s, um, people would get like emotional,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
women would get kind of choked up.
Yeah.
And they would get so excited to talk about Judy and the impact that she had on their lives. And I started thinking to myself, like, what is this? There are so many great writers out there. There were great writers who were writing books for children contemporary with Judy Blume. But there's something about her that really got under people's skin in a good way. I mean, and
Absolutely.
sometimes in a bad way, but for the most
Yeah.
part in a good way. And at the same time, she's in her 80s, and I was noticing that even just in the media, people were starting to really sing her praises and write opinion columns and think pieces about the impact that they had on them. So I was like, there's something in the mix here that needs to be identified, right? Like, I just really want to understand what it is about Judy. And that was kind of my mission with this book. It was to celebrate her work, um, uplift her characters, and also kind of try to understand what she was doing to sort of, take it apart a little bit and to try to understand why it has had such lasting impact.
And did you interview her and talk to her and sit with her for this?
I did not. What I did was I went to her archives at Yale.
Hmm.
So that was just an incredible experience. First of all, I personally, as a writer and researcher, like I love archival research.
Mm.
And I was able to kind of page through the early drafts of her novels and read her correspondence and find the notebook where she, wrote down her earliest ideas and,
Wow.
um, you know, unearth all these amazing buried treasures. But that was one of my major sources of material. And then, she's done, because she's been famous for so long, she's done so many interviews in the press and she's been very candid in a lot of ways. So I was able to use those resources as well.
Mm, mm, yeah. So how did she influence you sort of as a child or growing up or and her works on divorce? You said it really sort of influenced you at a young age.
Yeah, it's funny. So I was, like most writers, just like a constant reader. I always had my nose in a book. And my parents got divorced when I was 5.
Hmm.
And my mom had a friend with 2 older daughters, and they would give her, single mom, a bunch of hand-me-downs, clothes, shoes, books, whatever. And
Hmm.
among
Hmm.
those books were a bunch of Judy Blume's books. And so I would read them just because, they were there.
Right.
And
Yes. Yep.
I remember the first one I picked up was Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. And I was kind of
Mhm.
like, I don't know if I am interested in this, right? Like this is religious, right? Like God was in the title. I thought that
God.
was weird. But I loved it. And then the book that had such profound impact on me that I didn't really even understand until doing this project was Just as Long as We're Together.
Mm.
And that's not one of her most iconic books. I didn't write a ton about it in this book, but it was published in the late 80s. And it is a book that I was so obsessed with once I started reading it that I actually told my dad I didn't want him to read to me before bed anymore because I had my nose in this book and I didn't want to take a break. And it also was about things that I didn't want to share with him. It was about girls going through puberty and their friendship dynamics. And at one point, one of the characters looks at herself naked in the mirror and she's sort of inspecting the physical changes she's going through. And that's not the kind of book you want to read with your dad, right?
Nope. Nope.
So
Not at all.
So I remembered loving this book, and I remembered feeling like I was so fascinated by it's a trio of girls and fascinated by their friendship dynamics and that they reflected things I was going through in my real life. But it wasn't until I picked up the book as an adult that kind of a lightning bolt hit me where I was like, this is a book about a girl named Stephanie whose parents are going through divorce.
Hmm.
And it's not as much of a theme as it is, and it's not the end of the world, but it's still like a major motif in the book. And Stephanie is furious. Stephanie is angry. She's mean about it. She's overeating. She's gaining weight because she doesn't know what to do with her feelings. And
Wow.
I'm looking back at me as a young person thinking, like, well, I buried all of my feelings about my parents' divorce. And here I am reading this book, like I can't put it down. And I'm like, of course, that's why I was attracted to this book. But it didn't hit me on a conscious level until so much later when I looked back on it. So I encourage everybody when I talk about writing this book, I'm like, go back and read the books that you were obsessed with as a kid because they really tell you a lot about yourself as a young person and like what
Interesting.
kinds of things were, getting stuck in your mind. Like, I think there's something really fascinating about that.
That's very interesting. Huh. One of my favorite books when I was growing up is a book called, and it's definitely out of print. It's called That Makes Me Mad.
Mm,
And uh it's just about a kid who's just really angry about everything.
that's so funny.
Maybe I was really angry. I probably was. I there was so much out of my control, but my anger came out later, like as a teenager. I was holy shit was I angry as a teen. Yeah.
I think when we were growing up in the 70s, 80s, like there wasn't as much room for kids to be angry. Like that wasn't
Mm-mm.
normalized, again, to use that word. But now I'm raising,
Yeah.
I have a 10-year-old and we try really hard to give him space if he feels angry to be angry, right? And I think that's kind of a newer development in parenting.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Or just even asking your kids, like, what are you feeling? Like helping them name their
Yes.
feelings. Is it this? Is it that? No, it's this. Great.
Right.
I remember that with my son and learning, helping him identify feelings and connect with them and be okay. Like there's no bad feeling, right?
Right.
They're just feelings. There's nothing wrong. Um, and and you sort of marveling at the fact, just at the way, at how differently, just from one generation, parenting, it just took a massive leap. Um,
Absolutely.
and I think Judy Blume has probably a lot to do with that because we were raised with this, reading these books that to me felt like, oh, wow, you can do that or you can talk about that or right, she was naming in her books the feelings and experiences that we were all having that there were no words for, and so she kind of raised a generation of kids who went on to parent really differently.
Completely. And I mean, it's funny because I think a lot of people explicitly think of Judy Blume as kind of like a benevolent mother figure in their lives, right?
Mhm.
One of the things that I discovered in her archives were these just folder after folder of letters she was receiving from children.
Yeah.
And they're not just normal fan letters. I mean, some of them are, but these letters go really deep. And a lot of them say things like, "You're the only person I can tell this," or "I can't talk to my parents about this, but I know you'll understand." It's like she connected with children on this level where she was making up for deficits in their home lives, right? Which was a
Yeah.
huge responsibility for her. She actually, if you
Sure.
see the documentary that was made about her, they talked to
Hmm.
some of the children that she corresponded with, that she actually wrote them back and that she
Oh.
developed relationships with. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons we all have these emotional reactions when we talk about Judy Blume is because she does feel like kind of a parental figure to so many of us. Like, this is not my story, but a lot of people say, like, nobody in my house talked about menstruation. I didn't understand what a period was. And then all of a sudden I was able to read Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, and feel like I wasn't dying when I got my period, like
Right.
she was filling in gaps in emotional education, in sexual education, that kids couldn't find elsewhere, because again these books were published at a time before the internet, where if you wanted to know about menstruation you'd have to go to an encyclopedia if nobody would tell you, right? This was
At
such a different world.
at your public library, right?
Right.
And
Right.
like, right? And like ask a librarian or, right? Or get an anatomy book that doesn't include any female pleasure or, organs.
Right.
So, right? Like,
Right.
um, uh, I had a question about that and it flew out of my brain. So be it. Oh, I wanted to ask for listeners who may not be familiar with Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. Um, you alluded to the fact that it's about menstruation, but it's it's about more than that, right? It's about
Yes.
adolescence, it's about coming of age, it's about how we develop at different rates. And it's this girl who's begging God to get her period, right? When everybody else has it and she doesn't.
Yeah, so Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. It was published in 1970, and it's about an 11-year-old girl. And that book actually goes a lot of different places, and it's known as the menstruation book. It's known as the We Must Increase Our Bust book, because it is about a group of girls who become almost competitive about the milestones of puberty. Oh, I mean,
Right.
not almost, they do become competitive about it. They're like so excited to wear bras and get their periods, and they want to be the first to, that milestone. But it's also about a girl who's making sense of the world. She's being raised in a dual faith household.
Mm.
Mom was from a Christian family, dad is Jewish. Mom's family disowned her after she decided to marry a Jewish man. So the idea, the topic of religion is very complicated in the home. And Margaret's trying to make sense of that because everyone in her neighborhood is either Jewish or Christian. They go to the JCC or they go to the Y, and that's that. And she doesn't fit anywhere. So, on top of her body changing and having to like figure out friendship dynamics and crushes, she's also trying to understand her place in the world when it comes to religion and God. So it's a really, really beautiful book. I think it's
Mm.
one of Judy Blume's best. I think it's one of her most famous for a reason because it just perfectly captures that experience of waking up, being, suddenly not a child and not an adult and trying to figure out the world around you.
In 1970. I
In
mean,
1970.
1970.
Yep.
God love her. God love her. What else do you want people to know about her and her legacy and um, why she should continue to be read?
Yeah, a lot of people have asked me this, like, do the books hold up? Do they have anything to offer for kids now? And I want to put a resounding yes out there.
Hmm.
Yes, it's a different world. Yes, kids have Apple Watches and the internet and video games now, but the emotional truth of these books is still so real. It's still so close to the bone. They're still so accessible. Um, when I was researching this project, my son was a little young for some of the books, like Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. But we read
Hmm.
the Super Fudge books, which are or just the
Hmm.
Fudge books, and they are still so funny. He was laughing so hard, and he was laughing at the parts that I remember laughing at. So I really do think these books continue to have value. Um, They also are a great like gateway to other really interesting books and young adult fiction and middle grade fiction that's out there now because like we talked about a little bit earlier, Judy Blume has influenced so many writers and there are just incredible books for kids out now that you and I didn't have access to, but there's kind of a book for every situation, right? So,
Yeah.
I just want to like stand up for books. I always say let the kids read because it's the best way to learn about things in like a safe way.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, yeah, I think Judy's legacy is not to be understated. I think she's
Love it.
been such a huge mover and shaker in our culture.
It's great. Do you think It's Not the End of the World holds up as a book for kids about divorce? I mean, now we have, an entire library full of books about divorce. What are your thoughts on that I mean, the divorce laws have changed, so there's a lot that's different.
There's a lot that's different. I don't think that's one of Judy Blume's best books.
Hmm.
I included it in my book because I think, just the impact of writing about divorce in 1972 was so important. Um,
Yeah.
But I do think actually, if you read even It's Not the End of the World against Just as Long as We're Together, there is a little bit more lived in experience of
Mm.
how hard divorce feels for everybody in the later book, right?
Hmm.
In the first one, in It's Not the End of the World, she hadn't been through a divorce yet. By the
Right,
time she wrote
right.
the
So as
second
the
one, she had been through two. And she had,
right.
felt its impact. She had seen the way it impacted her children. And so I think it's not the end of the world, even though Karen is upset, she's angry, whatever. Um, it's actually a little sunnier than her perspective in
Yeah.
Just as Long as We're Together. But I think for like a younger child, it's not the end of the world could be a good pick. And then for a slightly older one, Just as Long as We're Together would be the better choice.
Great. Rochelle, thank
Yeah.
you so much for coming on and talking about this, and thank you for keeping the light shining on this woman who has had such a profound impact on so many of us. So great.
Anytime. Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm assuming that your book can be found in all places where books are sold. It's called The Genius of Judy, and I really encourage everyone to go out and grab yourself a copy.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rochelle.